The security guard was about to approach her when André Rieu'S stepped out of the historic Charleston Theatre and froze. A small girl sat alone on the weathered brick steps, clutching a worn Bible against her chest like a lifeline. No parent in sight, no guardian nearby. Just a 9-year-old child waiting for something that only she understood. What André did next would transform an ordinary evening concert into a moment that would haunt every person in that theater for the rest of their lives. But first, let me know where you're listening from and how old you are in the comments below. And if this story touches your heart, please hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss these incredible true stories that remind us what really matters in life. That October morning had broken grey and cool across Charleston's cobblestone streets, the kind of southern autumn day that whispers of change. The historic Dock Street Theatre stood elegant and timeless, its antebellum architecture casting long shadows across the quiet district. Tourists moved slowly through the area, most unaware that something extraordinary would unfold within those walls before sunset. For André Rieu'S, this wasn't just another performance. He had specifically chosen this intimate venue, far from the massive arenas where he usually performed, seeking something his soul had been craving, a connection. A space where music could breathe without the pressure of spectacle, where every note could find its way to the heart, without competing with flashing lights and theatrical productions. Since dawn, André had felt an unusual restlessness. The rehearsal was scheduled for early afternoon, and his musicians were gradually arriving from various hotels scattered throughout the historic district. Marcus tuned his violin in contemplative silence, while Emma handled the final production details with her characteristic precision. Sarah walked through the theater with careful steps, ensuring every detail was perfect before the audience arrived. The atmosphere was serene, almost sacred. André wandered through the theater's aged corridors, observing walls marked by decades of performances, thinking about the countless stories that had unfolded in this very space. He had always believed that certain places held invisible memories, perceptible only to those who knew how to listen. Perhaps that's why he had chosen this theater. An hour before the doors opened, André decided to step outside for a few minutes. He loved observing the surroundings of the places where he performed, feeling the pulse of the city, hearing sounds that didn't come from instruments. That's when he noticed something that didn't belong. Near the side entrance, far from the main activity, sat a child alone. The girl wasn't playing, wasn't speaking, didn't seem to be waiting for anyone. Her gaze was lowered, concentrated on a small, worn book that she held with extraordinary care for someone so young. André slowed his pace without realizing it. He didn't yet know who she was or why she was there, but in that moment, he felt that this encounter was not coincidental. The theater where he was about to perform was one of Charleston's oldest, with a history spanning over 2 centuries. The walls carried stories of performers who had graced its stage, of audiences who had wept and laughed within its embrace. André always felt a special connection to places like this, where music wasn't just entertainment, but a form of spiritual expression. That morning, he had lain awake longer than usual in his hotel room, staring at the ceiling and listening to the city sounds filtering through his window. The traffic was different from what he knew in the Netherlands. The city's rhythm had its own cadence. He had thought about the evening's program, about the pieces he had chosen, but something within him sensed that the night wouldn't be what he had planned. As he had walked to the theater, he had admired the architecture, the ornate facades, the windows with their intricate ironwork, the wooden doors that gleamed in the morning light. Charleston had always had this effect on him, a mixture of reverence for the past and excitement for what was to come. But nothing in his preparations had prepared him for what he would find at the side entrance. A child so small and quiet, holding a book that seemed too large for her tiny hands. There was something in the way she sat there, something that touched his heart in a way he couldn't immediately explain. André stopped a few meters away, not knowing exactly why. The theater's side entrance was rarely used by the public. It served more for technical access and deliveries. But there sat the girl on the cold brick steps, her feet swaying lightly in the air. She held the small book as if it was something too precious to set on the ground. The cover was worn, the page edges yellowed by time and frequent use. He observed for several seconds in silence. Grace seemed neither afraid nor curious about the movement around her. Her gaze was fixed on the open book, but her lips didn't move. She wasn't reading aloud. She was simply following the lines with her finger slowly, like someone who already knew those words by heart. The question that arose in André's mind was simple but urgent. What was this child doing here alone, with a Bible in her lap? waiting for something that only she seemed to understand. André took another step forward. The sound of his shoes echoed softly on the sidewalk, and then the girl lifted her eyes. Her gaze wasn't childlike. There was no exaggerated surprise, no spontaneous smile, only attention. "Hello?" André said with a soft voice, almost respectful. "Are you waiting for someone?" Grace closed the Bible carefully before answering. She took a few seconds as if choosing each word. "No," she said. "I'm waiting for the music." The answer surprised him. André tilted his head slightly, trying to understand. "The music?" he repeated. She nodded. "It always comes," she added, discreetly pointing toward the theater's interior. Before André could ask more, Sarah appeared at the side door, clearly concerned. "Maestro, we're ready to resume rehearsal," she said. Then she noticed the girl. "Oh, are you with an adult?" Grace shook her head. Sarah frowned. "That's not allowed. The doors aren't open yet." André raised his hand, asking for calm. "It's all right," he said. "Let's understand first." Sarah breathed deeply but stepped back a few paces. "What's your name?" André asked. "Grace." "And this book?" He pointed to the Bible. The girl's fingers tightened slightly around the cover. "It's mine," she answered. "It was my mother's." A brief silence fell between them. André felt something tighten in his chest, an old sensation, familiar, that usually appeared before certain performances when the music seemed to weigh more than normal. "Do you come here often?" he asked. "Only when he plays," Grace said. "Who?" She lifted her gaze again, directly to him. "You." André remained motionless. It wasn't unusual to be recognized, but there was something in the way she said it. It wasn't admiration or excitement. It was certainty. Before he could respond, Marcus appeared at the door holding his violin. "André, we need you on stage," he said. Then he stopped, seeing the scene. "Is everything all right?" "It's fine," André answered, without taking his eyes off the girl. "Take the rehearsal slower. I'll be right there." Marcus hesitated but nodded and walked away. André crouched to be at Grace's level. "Are you going to watch the concert today?" She looked briefly at the ground. "If they let me stay," she said, "I promised I would listen until the end." "Promise to whom?" Grace opened the Bible again and showed a page marked with a small piece of blue ribbon. André couldn't read the text from a distance, but he noticed something written in the margin in childish, crooked letters. "To her," she answered. André felt that this conversation wouldn't end here, and in that moment, without understanding the reason, he was certain that this girl hadn't ended up at that door by accident. Something about that evening had already changed, even before the first note was played. He stood up and looked at Grace once more. There was something in her presence that reminded him of his own childhood, of the first times he had heard music and felt it was more than just sound. It was a language, a way to speak about things for which words weren't enough. "May I see the book?" André asked softly. Grace hesitated but then handed it to him with both hands, as if transferring a treasure. André took it carefully, feeling the weight of the worn pages, the warmth of small hands that had held it for so long. He opened it to the marked page. The text was underlined with colored pencils, and in the margin was written in childish handwriting, "Don't be afraid, I'm listening." André felt his throat tighten. He looked at Grace, who was watching him with large, serious eyes. "Who wrote this?" he asked. "Mama," Grace answered simply. "She said that whenever I was scared." It was then that André realized this child carried more than a book. She carried a memory, a presence, something larger than herself. He returned the Bible and Grace received it with the same care. "Where is your mother now?" André asked carefully. Grace looked at the book in her hands. "She went away," she said quietly. "But she said that God speaks to us in many ways. Sometimes with words, sometimes with silence, sometimes with music." The words touched André deeper than he had expected. He was used to compliments about his music, to people telling him how it had moved them. But this was different. This came from a place of pure truth without filters or expectations. "And you believe he speaks when I play?" André asked. "Yes," Grace answered without hesitation. "Because when you play, people become quiet inside." André found no immediate response. They remained there next to each other, while the distant sound of the city filled the space between them. Behind the door, André heard the muffled sounds of the orchestra preparing. He knew he had to return, but something kept him there with this small girl and her great truth. "Who brought you here today?" he finally asked. "Samuel," she said. "He's inside, but he doesn't like concerts. He said I could wait outside." "Is he your father?" "No," Grace answered. "He just takes care of me." Before André could ask more, Samuel appeared at the side door. A simple man with a tired expression and a suspicious look upon seeing André sitting next to the girl. "Grace, we have to go," he said. She stood immediately, holding the Bible against her chest. "I'll come back later," she said, looking at André. "I promised to listen until the end." Samuel frowned. "Come back? We didn't agree on that." André also stood up. "She can stay," he said with calm determination. "I'll take responsibility." Samuel hesitated. "The concert is tonight," André insisted. "She'll be safe." The man looked at Grace, then at André. Something in his gaze changed, as if he recognized that this decision no longer belonged entirely to him. "All right then," he said finally, "but only today." Grace smiled for the first time. Not a broad smile, but enough for André to notice that this small concession had enormous meaning. As Samuel walked away, André felt the weight of responsibility land on his shoulders. He didn't yet know what he would do. He only knew that this Bible, this promise, and this girl were now part of the evening that was about to happen. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that nothing would be the same after that night in Charleston. André entered the theater with slow steps, but his thoughts remained outside on the cold steps where Grace had been sitting. On stage, the orchestra waited. The musicians talked softly, tuned instruments, repeated well-known passages. Everything followed the normal course. But for André, something had fallen out of balance. From the beginning of the second movement, he said, raising his bow, the music began, soft and controlled. Yet André couldn't fully surrender himself. Between one entry and another, his attention drifted. The girl's face appeared in his thoughts with uncomfortable clarity. It wasn't the fact that she had recognized him. Children often recognized him. It was the way she spoke about music, as if it were something alive, something that kept promises. After several minutes, André interrupted the rehearsal. "Let's take a break," he said, setting down his violin. 10 minutes. Marcus approached immediately. "Is everything all right?" he asked quietly. "I don't know yet," André answered, "but I need to find out." Without waiting for more explanation, he descended from the stage and followed the side passage. Sarah stood near the door, looking outside with concern. "She's still there," she said before André could even ask. "She hasn't moved from her spot." "Thank you," he responded. Grace remained sitting in the same way, as if time had passed only for the rest of the world. When she saw André, she closed the Bible again. "You came back," she said. "I came back," he confirmed. "May I sit?" She shrugged, a small gesture. André sat on the steps next to her, feeling the cold seeping through the fabric of his jacket. They remained in silence for several seconds. "You said you promised to listen to the music until the end," he noted. "Why is that so important?" Grace didn't answer directly. She opened the Bible to the page marked by the blue ribbon, and this time brought the book closer to him. André saw the text underlined with colored pencils, and next to it a sentence written in childish letters. "Don't be afraid. I'm listening." "My mother wrote that for me," Grace said. "Always when I was scared." "Did she love music?" André asked. "No," the girl answered, "but she loved it when I listened." André felt the weight of those words. There was no drama in them, only truth. "Where is your mother now?" he asked carefully. Grace closed the book. "She went away," she said, "but she said that God speaks to us in many ways, sometimes with words, sometimes with silence, sometimes with music." André breathed deeply. It wasn't the first time he had heard someone associate his music with something spiritual, but never in this way, never coming from someone so young. "And you believe he speaks when I play?" he asked. "Yes," Grace answered without hesitation. "Because when you play, people become quiet inside." André found no immediate response. They remained there next to each other while the distant sound of the city filled the space between them. It was then that something unexpected happened. An older man approached from across the street, his gaze directed at Grace. He wore a long coat and his hair was white, his face marked by many years. As he came closer, André recognized him. It was William, a local retired conductor he had met years ago at a festival. "Grace?" the man called softly. The girl looked up and her expression changed subtly, a mixture of recognition and what seemed like relief. "Uncle William," she said. The man crouched beside her and then looked at André, clearly surprised. "Maestro Rieu'S," William said. "What a surprise to see you here." André nodded politely. "I'm rehearsing for tonight, but I met Grace here." William looked at the girl with gentle eyes. "She comes to this theater often," he explained, "since her mother passed away." André felt his heart tighten at the confirmation of what he had already suspected. "She said she promised to listen until the end," André said softly. William nodded slowly. Her mother always brought her to concerts. It was their thing together. And before she passed, she made Grace promise to keep listening to music, to remember that beauty still exists, even when it hurts. The words hung heavy in the air between the three of them. André looked at Grace, who sat quietly staring at her Bible, her fingers stroking the cover. "May I ask," André began carefully, "why the Bible is so important?" It was Grace who answered, her voice clear and steady, "Because Mama read from it every night. And before she went away, she wrote in all the margins, little things, memories, promises. She said that if I ever forgot what it was like to be loved, I just had to read." André felt tears prick behind his eyes. He was used to emotion in his work, to people crying during his concerts, but this was different. This was raw, pure humanity without performance or expectation. William stood up, his knees creaking with the movement. "I had to go, but I saw her here and wanted to make sure she was safe," he said. "Samuel comes to pick her up later." He placed a hand on Grace's shoulder. "Remember what I taught you, child. Music isn't just what you hear. It's what you feel when the notes stop." With those words, William turned and walked away, his figure slowly disappearing into the Charleston streets. André was left with Grace, the silence between them now filled with new understanding. He realized that this child's presence was more than coincidence. She was here to remind him of something he had forgotten in the rush of tours and concerts. "Grace," he said softly, "what do you really want to hear tonight?" She looked at him with those large, serious eyes. "I want to hear what Mama heard," she answered. "The music that let her know everything would be okay, even when it wasn't." André nodded slowly, a decision forming in his thoughts that he didn't yet fully understand, but that he knew was right. "Then I'll play that for you," he promised. And in that moment, without either of them knowing it, the real preparation for the concert began. Not in the theater, not with the orchestra, but here on cold brick steps with a girl and her Bible and a promise that would change everything. When André returned to the stage, the rehearsal resumed, but it was no longer the same. Every note seemed loaded with something not written in the score. Marcus noticed first. André's bow moved with more care, as if he were listening to something beyond the orchestra itself. "It's different," Marcus murmured during a brief pause. "Slower." André only nodded. "Continue this way," he responded. "Today we're not in a hurry." Emma approached with her clipboard in hand. "The theater opens in an hour," she warned. "Limited audience as agreed. Everything's going according to plan." André looked at the empty seats in front of the stage. For the first time in a long while, he felt that this concert wouldn't be about applause. "I need to make an adjustment," he said. Emma looked up. "Repertoire adjustment?" "No," André answered. "Intention adjustment." She didn't press further. She knew that tone. When André spoke like that, something extraordinary was about to happen. Shortly before the doors opened, Sarah led Grace into the theater. The girl walked slowly, as if entering a sacred place. She sat in the third row, exactly in the center, with the Bible in her lap. She didn't look around. Her eyes were focused on the empty stage. André observed her discreetly from behind the curtain. Seeing her so small in that immense space gave him a feeling of urgency. Something had to be done, something that wasn't rehearsed, agreed upon, or authorized. "André," Marcus called, approaching. "Everything's ready." "Not everything," he responded. "I need to talk to you." Marcus frowned. "Now?" The two stepped aside. "Today, in the second block after the main piece," André said, "I don't want immediate applause." "What do you mean?" "I want silence," he answered. "Complete silence without announcing anything." Marcus stared at him, surprised. "That will confuse the audience." "Exactly," André said. "Confusion creates space for listening." Marcus breathed deeply. After a pause, "André, this isn't in the program." "I know." There was a moment of hesitation. "Do you trust me?" André asked. Marcus nodded slowly. He always trusted. When the lights went down and the concert began, the audience responded with expected enthusiasm. The orchestra sounded impeccable. Each movement was received with attention and respect. Yet André felt that all of this was merely the path to something greater. During the intervals between pieces, his eyes sought Grace. She remained motionless, hands on the Bible, as if waiting for something specific. Not the music itself, but the right moment. At the end of the main work, the audience began to applaud. André raised his hand. The applause gradually stopped, replaced by uncomfortable silence. People looked at each other without understanding. André remained standing, violin lowered. Then he made an unexpected gesture. He walked to the edge of the stage and spoke without a microphone. "Today, music didn't come just to be heard," he said. "It came to answer." The audience remained motionless. André turned, walked to the side of the stage, and signaled to Sarah. She hesitated but obeyed. Grace was led to the stage. The girl climbed the steps carefully, holding the Bible tightly. A murmur went through the audience. André knelt before her. "You promised to listen until the end," he said softly. Grace nodded. "Now it's my turn to keep the promise," André replied. He returned to the center of the stage, raised the violin, and for the first time that evening followed no score. The melody that emerged was simple, almost childlike, but loaded with a delicacy that held everyone's breath. Grace closed her eyes, and in that moment André knew he had crossed a point of no return. The concert no longer belonged to him, neither did the music. Something greater had taken control, and no one in the theater, absolutely no one, expected what was about to happen. It was then that something extraordinary occurred. As André played, Grace began to sing softly. Her voice was thin but pure, a melody that André didn't recognize, but that fit perfectly with what he was playing. The words were in a language he didn't immediately recognize, perhaps a childhood prayer or a song her mother had taught her. The audience was frozen. Some reached for their phones but stopped halfway, as if recording this moment would violate something sacred. Others had tears in their eyes, touched by something they couldn't fully explain. Marcus, watching from his position, felt his chest tighten. In all his years with André, he had never seen anything like this. It was no longer a concert. It was something deeper, something touching the edge of the spiritual. Emma stood behind the scenes, her clipboard forgotten in her hands. She had organized everything, planned every detail. But this was something no planning could have foreseen. The melody reached a crescendo, and Grace's voice rose with it, a perfect harmony that seemed to come from somewhere beyond both of them. And then, at the most unexpected moment, the music didn't stop gradually, didn't slow with a ritardando. It stopped suddenly like a question hanging in mid-air. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the sound of breathing seemed to have stopped. André stood there, his violin still under his chin, bow in the air, looking at Grace. The girl opened her eyes, and in that gaze something had changed. There was still sadness, but also something else, peace, perhaps, or understanding. She opened the Bible and took out something small, a piece of paper, folded and yellowed with age. She unfolded it carefully and began to read, her voice clear in the absolute silence of the theater. "Mama wrote," she said, "that if she couldn't tell me she loved me anymore, I should listen to the music. Because love doesn't stop when someone goes away. It just changes form." Tears now flowed freely down the faces of many in the audience. This was no longer a concert. It was a testimony, a moment of collective humanity that touched everyone to their core. André knelt again before Grace. "Your mother was right," he said softly. "Love never stops. It becomes music. It becomes silence. It becomes memory. But it never stops." Grace looked at him with those large, serious eyes. "Thank you for helping me here," she said. And in that moment, André realized this was why he had chosen music. Not for fame, not for applause, but for moments like this. Moments when music bridged the gap between life and loss, between sorrow and hope, between silence and speech. The theater remained in complete silence. No one dared move. No one wanted to break this moment. And in that silence, the real miracle happened. Not in the notes that had been played, but in the space between them. In the connection that had been made between a girl, a maestro, and a promise finally kept. The melody flowed without haste, as if it had long existed before that stage. André played with half-closed eyes, not for the audience, but for something invisible between the notes. There was no virtuosity, no spectacle, only sound and pause, breathing and waiting. The entire theater seemed suspended. No one coughed, no one moved. The silence between musical phrases was just as important as the music itself. It was in that silence that something happened. Grace remained standing near the stage, the Bible pressed against her chest. Her shoulders relaxed slowly, as if an old burden was being lifted. The words she didn't say found space in what was left unsaid. Marcus observed from the orchestra, his violin resting on his shoulder, forgotten. He had never seen André play like this. It wasn't a conductor leading musicians. It was a man speaking with something greater than himself. When the melody ended, André didn't immediately lower his bow. He let the last note fade away, dissolving into the air. The silence returned, deeper than before. Then something unexpected happened. Grace took a small step forward, The sound of her shoes echoed too loudly in that absolute emptiness. She looked at André, seeking permission. He nodded almost imperceptibly. The girl opened the Bible, not to read, just to open it. The simple gesture, almost mundane, caused visible discomfort in the audience. Some people shifted in their seats, others held their breath. Grace lifted her face and spoke with a clear voice, too steady for someone 9 years old. "My mother said that when we don't know what to ask anymore, it's better to listen." She paused briefly. I listened. André felt a lump in his throat. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't performance. He knew that. Every musician there knew it too. "Today," Grace continued, "I promised to listen until the end, and I listened. Now I can go in peace." A murmur went through the audience. Some people discreetly wiped their eyes without exactly understanding why. There was no complete story, no logical explanation, only truth. André approached slowly. He didn't touch her, just stood beside her. "Thank you for reminding me," he said softly but audibly. Grace closed the Bible and nodded like someone completing an important task. It was then that André made the final decision. He turned to the orchestra and without words made a clear gesture. A single soft chord emerged, sustained, almost like a collective whisper. It wasn't a known piece. It had no name. It was just presence. Grace descended from the stage with Sarah's help and sat again in her seat. This time she leaned back against the backrest and closed her eyes peacefully. The chord stopped, and only then came the applause. Not explosive, not immediate. It came like waves, gradually growing, loaded with something different. Gratitude, respect, something close to reverence. André bowed, but didn't smile. His eyes sought Grace one last time. She was sleeping. Backstage, Emma approached, visibly moved. "What was that, André?" she asked. "People will ask. The press will ask." "They can ask," he answered. "Not everything needs an answer." Samuel waited at the side of the theater. When he saw Grace being led toward him, his face changed. The girl seemed lighter, as if she had left something behind. "You listened until the end," he said, kneeling before her. "I listened," Grace answered, "and he listened too." Samuel raised his eyes to André, who was approaching. "Thank you," the man said, without knowing exactly what for. André only nodded. "Some promises don't need to be explained," he replied. As the theater slowly emptied, many knew they had witnessed something rare. Not a great spectacle, not a planned moment, but an encounter. And that evening in Charleston it became clear that music, when it finds the right silence, can answer questions that no one has the courage to ask aloud. It was William who approached André after most people had left. The old conductor had watched the entire concert from the back. His face was wet with tears he hadn't tried to hide. "You did what I never could," William said softly. "You let her hear what her mother wanted her to hear." André shook his head. "I just played the notes," he replied. "Grace did the rest." William placed a hand on André's shoulder. "You don't understand," he said. "Her mother brought her to every concert I conducted in the last months before she passed. She always said that music was the only language that didn't lie. And tonight, you proved that truth." The two men stood there in the now empty hall, surrounded by the echo of what had happened. "What happens to her now?" André asked. "Samuel does his best," William answered. "But it's difficult. Grace has moments when she withdraws into herself, weeks when she barely speaks. But tonight I saw her mother in her eyes. The peace, I mean." André felt the weight of those words. He hadn't just played for an audience. He had played for a little girl who needed a way to say goodbye to her mother. And somehow, without planning it, the music had built that bridge. Sarah came to them, her eyes red from crying. "The people outside," she said, "they want to know about the girl. There are already messages on social media, questions about what happened." André looked at her with determination. "Tell them nothing," he said. "This isn't their story to tell. It's Grace's. But they'll keep asking." "Then let them ask," André answered. "Some moments are meant to be experienced, not explained." Later, when André was alone in his dressing room, he took his violin and played softly the same melody he had played for Grace. It sounded different now, loaded with the memory of her voice, of the silence that had followed, of the peace he had seen in her eyes. He realized that this concert, this evening in Charleston, had taught him more about music than decades of performances. It wasn't about technique or perfection. It was about connection, about touching that place in people where words couldn't reach. His phone rang, but he ignored it. There would be messages, questions, maybe even criticism, but none of that mattered. What mattered had happened in those moments of silence. in a little girl's eyes who had finally heard what her mother had wanted her to hear. And as André put away his violin and prepared to leave, he knew that this evening would stay with him forever. Not as one of his greatest concerts, but as one of his most important, because he had learned that sometimes the smallest moments carry the greatest weight. The theater was almost empty when André returned to the stage one last time. The quiet seats seemed larger without the audience, as if they held echoes that hadn't yet decided to leave. He walked to the center, looked up at the ornate ceiling, and took a deep breath. This evening wouldn't end when the lights went out. He knew that. Behind the scenes, Marcus packed his violin with unusual care. "I've never seen anything like that," he said without looking up. "It wasn't a concert." "No," André answered. It was an answer. Emma approached with her phone trembling in her hands. "They're already asking," she said. "Videos, messages, journalists. They want to know who the girl is. They want to know why you did that." André shook his head. "Don't tell her story," he said. "It doesn't belong to us." Emma nodded understandingly. Outside, Samuel adjusted Grace's coat as she still seemed half asleep. The girl held the Bible with less force now, as if she no longer needed to cling to it so tightly. "You kept your promise," Samuel said. "I did," Grace answered. "Now I can listen at home too." She looked back at the theater one last time. "He'll remember," she added. Samuel didn't ask who. When André came out through the side door, the cool night air enveloped him. He saw Grace and Samuel preparing to leave. He approached slowly. "Grace," he called. She turned immediately. "Thank you for trusting the music," André said. The girl thought for a few seconds. "It wasn't in the music," she replied. "It was in you when you became quiet." André felt a sting in his chest. He knelt before her. "Keep this with you," he said, taking a small object from his pocket. A simple medallion without inscription. "It's not an amulet. It's just a reminder that listening is also a gift." Grace held the medallion curiously. "May I keep it in the Bible?" she asked. "You may," André answered, smiling. She carefully opened the book and placed the medallion between the pages, marked by the blue ribbon. Without more words, they said goodbye. Later, alone in his hotel room, André set his violin on the table and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence there was different. Not empty, but full. He picked up the violin again and played the same melody from the evening softly just for himself. It sounded different. It would always sound different. The next morning, the concert would be commented on as one of the strangest in his career. Some would call it daring, others emotional improvisation. Few would understand, but André didn't need them to understand because sometimes a girl with a Bible doesn't appear to ask for something. She appears just to remind us that music doesn't begin when the bow touches the string. It begins when someone decides to listen, and that André Rieu would never forget. In the weeks that followed, stories began to spread, not just about the concert, but about what it meant. People who had been there shared their experiences on social platforms, each with their own interpretation of what they had witnessed. Some spoke of a spiritual experience, a moment when music became more than entertainment and transformed into something sacred. Others talked about André's courage to abandon his program and do something completely spontaneous. But most spoke of Grace, of the little girl with the Bible who had touched them all in a way they couldn't explain. Journalists tried to trace the story. They called Emma, approached Sarah, tried to interview Marcus, but all followed André's instruction. Grace's story wasn't theirs to tell. Margaret, a columnist who had been at the concert, wrote a piece that was different from her usual work. She didn't speak of scandal or sensation. She wrote about humanity, about the power of a simple gesture, about how art can sometimes bridge the gap between loss and acceptance. The piece went viral, but not because it was shocking. It went viral because it was true. People recognized in the story their own experiences with loss, their own search for meaning, their own moments of unexpected grace. William, the old conductor, received a copy of the article and read it with tears in his eyes. He nodded to himself, knowing that his role in this story had been small but essential. He had guided Grace to that place, but it was André who had helped her hear what she needed to hear. Weeks later, André received a letter. He didn't recognize the handwriting, but when he opened it, he found a drawing of a girl holding a violin and a Bible. Below it was written in childish handwriting, "Thank you for helping me hear Mama's music, Grace." André framed the drawing and hung it in his studio, where he could see it every day. It reminded him of why he did what he did, why music mattered, why some moments were worth more than all the applause in the world. The concert in Charleston would be remembered, but not for the notes that were played or the orchestra's technical perfection. It would be remembered for the moment when a maestro decided that a promise to a little girl was more important than a program, for the moment when music transformed from performance to connection, from sound to answer. And for André Rieu, for Marcus, for Emma and Sarah, for everyone who had been there that evening, it would be a memory they would carry for the rest of their lives, not as an achievement or a success, but as a lesson in what truly mattered. On an evening, months later, during another concert in another city, André paused between two pieces and looked out over the audience. He thought of Grace, of her Bible, of the promise she had kept and that he had helped fulfill. And he realized that since then he played differently, not necessarily better but deeper, with more attention to the spaces between the notes, to the silence that was just as important as the sound, to the possibility that somewhere in the audience sat someone who needed an answer that only music could give. The concert continued, the notes filled the hall, and André played with his eyes half closed, listening not just to the music, but to something deeper. And in that listening, he found what he had learned in Charleston, that the greatest gift a musician can give isn't virtuosity or perfection, but the willingness to be a bridge between silence and sound, between loss and hope, between question and answer. And as the last notes of the evening faded and the applause began, André knew he would carry Grace's lesson with him wherever he went, because some moments seem small, but change everything. And some encounters, however brief, leave an echo that lasts a lifetime. Years passed, and the story of that evening in Charleston became part of André Rieu'S legacy, though he rarely spoke of it publicly. When young musicians asked him about his most meaningful performance, he would smile quietly and say simply, "Sometimes the music teaches us as much as we teach it." Grace grew up carrying that evening with her, and though she faced many challenges in the years that followed, she never forgot the moment when music became the bridge between her sorrow and her healing. The medallion remained pressed between the pages of her mother's Bible, a tangible reminder of the night when a promise was kept and love found its voice in unexpected harmony. And in concert halls around the world, whenever André lifted his violin, he carried with him the understanding that music's greatest power lies not in its complexity or grandeur, but in its ability to speak to the human heart when words fall short, just as it did on one unforgettable autumn evening in Charleston, when a little girl with a Bible taught a world-renowned musician the true meaning of listening.